Hi, welcome to the 14-day weather forecast. I always try to remain as objective as possible when doing these updates, but I think it's fair to say that many people would consider this to be a lousy spring so far. So, is there any sign of an improvement as we head through the next 2 weeks, or can we expect more wet conditions? As usual, I'm going to start by taking a look at the view across Europe and the North Atlantic. The animation runs from 18 GMT, Tuesday the 9th. Unsettled sums things up at the outset. Low pressure to the northwest, heavy showers pushing across the southern half of the UK in particular. As I run this, not a great deal changes in the short term. Low pressure starts to sink southwards across the UK, and into the weekend, at last, something changes. A ridge of high pressure builds across the UK. It's drier in all parts, at least for a time, with the showers there in the south starting to fade away. From this point onwards, though, things start to become more uncertain. I'll just run this through to its conclusion because another band of rain moves southeastwards, low pressure returns, and it's quite a changeable or unsettled end to the week. High pressure once again becoming centred just to the north, so the wettest conditions likely to be in the southern half of the UK at this point, according to this computer model run. It's all quite underwhelming according to the GFS. There isn't any sign of a prolonged period of dry and settled weather, just that interlude there through the middle of the week as a ridge of high pressure builds across the UK for a brief time. The jet stream animation associated with that shows things quite nicely. To start off with, it's well to the south for the time of year. I'll just quickly run the animation. It's quite a mixed picture, but jet stream often staying close to what was south UK. By the end there, Wednesday the 17th, it's more broken up and less well defined, but there really isn't a signal for it to become particularly settled as of yet. With all that showery weather around, temperatures aren't going to be fantastic. Here is the forecast maximums from the GFS for 15 GMT, Wednesday the 10th, 14s, 15s, 16s. Nothing particularly warm. Friday the 12th, at this point the low pressure was starting to sink southwards, so the driest conditions probably in Scotland and Northern Ireland, and that's where the highest temperatures are. The showers becoming focused on the southern half of the UK, and the temperatures there reflect that. They're a few degrees lower than in the northwest. The nights though, well, not particularly cold by any means, but still quite pleasant for sleeping. We're not yet getting those really sticky, muggy nights that we do tend to get later on in the season. Single figures across most of the UK, but by now the risk of frost has diminished almost completely. Into the first part of next week, Tuesday the 16th, and looking at the maximum temperatures once more. Not fantastic at all, 11s or 12s across much of England and Wales, a little bit higher there in Northern Ireland. So it's actually quite a chilly picture in large parts of the UK, but a lot depends upon whether or not the unsettled conditions return at this point. If that area of high pressure slips away and low pressure moves down once again, as the GFS is indicating. But when I look at the deterministics a little bit later to compare them, you will see that there are some differences there. So there is some uncertainty at this point. Rainfall. The forecast aggregates from the ECM and GFS models in millimetres for days 0 to 5. The wettest conditions in southern and central Britain, 20, 30, 40 or even 50 millimetres of rain in places, tending to be drier as you head northwards. Moving forwards to the 0 to 10 day period, totals have increased everywhere, particularly now in the north, parts of Scotland there. Northern Ireland, particularly on the GFS chart on the right, have increased significantly, but also on the ECM chart on the left. It's a very, very mixed scenario all in all. As I've already mentioned, there are some differences in the details between the deterministic models towards the end of the first week. So let's take a quick look. Here's the GFS, Tuesday the 16th of May. It has high pressure centred to the west and the north, low pressure over southern Britain. The Canadian model at the same time has a high pressure centred in the Atlantic, lower pressure to our immediate north. The German icon, the high pressure is centred further southwest and low pressure just to the east, with a northerly flow really moving down across all regions. But the ECM deterministic is a little bit different. On this one, the high pressure is building eastwards, so it's a more settled picture across the UK, at least at this point. Perhaps a few showers in the southeast, but mainly dry. Finally, though, the UK Met Office Global, it has a high pressure further southwest, areas of low pressure to the north and the east, keeping the showery theme in place. Taking them all together, not a particularly settled scenario by any means. The best chance of dry periods in the west, because that's closest to the area of high pressure. Showers more likely to be focused on the east and the southeast of Britain at this time. Does that continue to be the case as we head through week 2, or will a change develop? As usual at this range, it's all about the trends and the probabilities, not forecast specifics. I'll start with the 16-day GEFS ensemble plot for London. Air temperatures across the top. The signal here is fairly average really to begin with. There are some runs a little bit above the thick black line, the 30-year norm, and a few dipping down underneath it. Later on, the trend, if anything, is upwards. The thick purple line, the ensemble mean, climbs above the thick black line through the second half of the second week. So warming up at least at the 850 HPA level, so approximately 1,500 meters above our heads, but nothing out of the ordinary. Across the bottom is the rain risk. Each spike shows a rain forecast from one of the individual runs within the ensemble model. There are quite a few to begin with, but their number decreases for a few days, suggesting a growing chance of drier periods. Perhaps towards the very end there of week 2, the number of spikes once again starts to rise. So nothing too settled, but the chance of some drier conditions through the middle part of the second week in particular. 2 meter temperatures, so for ones down at the ground level, which we actually experience. Lots of orange in these columns, so we're going through week 2 here. Each column represents the forecast maximums on a given day. The oranges are runs going for between 16 and 20 Celsius. The orangey reds are the next bracket up, so 21 to 25 Celsius. And the brighter reds, those of ones going for between 26 and 30 Celsius. The signal here is for temperatures to be climbing a little bit through the second week, and the likely maximums to be between 16 and 20 Celsius on most days, but a growing chance of something warmer there, up to 39% of the runs going for between 21 and 25 towards the end of the second week. Up to Manchester, air temperatures across the top, well, very similar to the London plot. The rain risk also not too dissimilar, perhaps less of a signal for drier conditions there through the middle part of the period. 2 meter temperatures for Manchester. The trend is upwards, lots of orange in the columns, so 16s to 20s being favoured. There is a little bit of the orangey red, but not as much as was on the London plot, so a little cooler as we head northwards. Finally, continuing the journey northwestwards to Glasgow, slightly above average again, air temperatures through the second week. In terms of rain, not many spikes at all during the first few days, and that fits in well with what those deterministic model runs were showing. High pressure centred to the west and just to the north of the UK, so the driest conditions in northwestern parts. But later on, the number of spikes does increase, so the chance of rain is increasing, perhaps pressure falling in the north. 2 metre temperatures for Glasgow. There isn't such a strong signal here as perhaps on the London and Manchester plots, which were indicating an upwards trend. Here, the amount of orange doesn't change a great deal. It's not the majority. The majority is mostly yellow, so 11 to 15 Celsius, 16 to 20, possible on some days, but less likely than on locations further south. So really just saying that as we go northwards, it's cooler on most days. The 10-day GEFS surface level pressure plot, so generated by averaging out all of the individual runs in the ensemble, is perhaps suggesting that high pressure will be centered to the southwest, the Azores high pressure as usual, and still at this point maybe to the north of the UK with low pressure over continental Europe. Not really pointing towards a settled scenario by any means. And the ECM, this may be indicating that high pressure is more influential. It fits in with the ECM deterministic run, and low pressure in continental Europe, keeping things more changeable or unsettled there. But just the suggestion that in the UK it will be a drying picture at this point. Finally, the mean surface level pressure data table for York going forwards through the second week. Lots of yellow in the columns, 1011 to 1025 millibars. Some green as well, so runs which are going for lower pressure, 996 to 1010 millibars, and the amount of green there is actually increasing through the second half of the second week. There isn't really a signal there for prolonged dry weather across the UK. The details are uncertain. It could be that high pressure will be transferring and building further south, and it has done recently, with the signal for it to be to the north of the UK weakening through the second week. But it is all quite an unsettled, uncertain picture at this range. So to summarise, week one, heavy and thundery showers in places early on, and with light winds, they will be slow moving. So if you catch one, it could be a real deluge. However, through Friday and into Saturday, it begins to turn drier, but that change doesn't last for too long because the risk of rain starts returning from Sunday. Week two, it's mixed. There is an ongoing chance of showers or longer spells of rain. Early on, the chance is greatest in the south. Later on, it transfers northwards. Temperatures through the 2 week period as a whole, really, often not very far from the average. In sunny spells, it will feel warm, but when the cloud comes over, the rain arrives, temperatures take a dip. So, there we have it. Quite mixed on the whole, just for a change. No sign of a prolonged period of dry and settled weather, at least not at the time of filming this video. Nonetheless, I hope you enjoyed it and found it useful. If you did, then please consider hitting the like button and subscribing to my channel if you haven't done so already. Thanks for watching now. Bye.